Okay guys, so here we are with a clean draft. It's all set up, it's on the drafting board. You have all your border lines, you have your title blocks. We're going to fill in those title blocks with your name, the title, your period, and the date. Make sure your title is three-piece puzzle, that you include your period number in that third box, and today's date that you started the draft. You can put your last name and your first name over there on the left-hand side, and let's get started. So you're going to divide this into 3 vertical sections, and to do that you want to measure from this border, this left-hand border, measure over 3 inches and 5/16. So we'll go to 3 and then we'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little lines on your ruler. That's 3 and 5/16. Now if you measure from the left like that, keeping your ruler horizontal, you can usually find a good spot to put your 0. But let's say we want to measure from here over the same amount, 3 and 5/16. What we can do is slide your ruler over and put the measurement 3 and 5/16 on the right-hand border line. And then mark it at 0. And you see you can do that. You can mark kind of backwards, if you will, or measure backwards. It's the same distance, right? So you got these 2 marks. Now, when we measure and we mark, we just put a little bit of a line. You see I had a nice thin line here. Here I was talking, I wasn't thinking, I went up and down too many times. Don't do that. Just put a small mark. A small, very thin mark is the reason you want to do that. Then it's more precise. So you're going to bring your T-square up here. Always remember, if you measure horizontally like we did, you're going to use your T-square vertically. The T-square must be tight up against the edge of the drafting board. Okay, so we're using the top edge. I'm pulling it tight, and I'm kind of pulling it down like this with my left hand. I get in here with my right hand, and I'm going to just drag that line down. Now this division line, guys, please, is only inside the working area. We don't go outside the border with that, okay? Over here to the next line. We're going to do something here, guys, that's called orthographic projection. And if you look at a finished draft, here's an example. That does kind of seem like a lot of lines and maybe a lot of things to measure. And you might be intimidated, but don't, because it's actually not that hard. This line, and this line, and this line, and this line, and this line, they're all connected. You only have to make this measurement one time, and then you project it across the page. So let me show you how to do that. We're going to start in the lower left-hand corner, down here. Now where you start isn't too terribly important. I just want you to pick a spot that's in this vicinity. It doesn't matter. People often ask me, how high above the title block, or how far in from the border? It doesn't matter, unless you've gone too far. But just come in a little bit. If you want an actual measurement, I've come in 1/8 of an inch from that direction and 1/2 inch from that direction, approximately. I just put a little dot here. That's kind of like your 0 spot on the coordinate plane. If you know about the Cartesian plane from math class, the XY grid. Now you're going to put your T-square on the drafting board horizontally, and we're going to make an extremely light line, the lightest line that you've made all day. Hold your pencil kind of up toward where the eraser is, so you're not pressing too hard, and then drag your pencil. Don't push it like this, or put the lead in front of your hand like that. You're going to drag it backwards. So we're going to bring that pencil up here. We're going to make a very, very light line, because a lot of that line is going to be erased, so we don't want to make it too dark. This is what's called a guideline. A lot of it will get erased. We're going to put some permanent lines on top of it. So we're going to make another guideline over here. So please put your T-square on there vertically, tight up against the top of your drafting board. And same thing, you're going to take your pencil to that dot is where we're going to start, and we're going to drag it up this way. A little bit. Now how much do I drag it, Mr. Broadway? Well, if you really want to know exactly, you can look here on the example draft. It's telling you that the space between these 2 lines, that's 4 inches. So you don't need to measure that when you're doing your guideline. What you need to do is measure your guideline after you draw it. So make sure it's at least 4 inches, right? And then this line you can take near the border, that bottom first line. We did just go near the right-hand border. We have a reference point. We have a reference point now, class, of where to measure from. So this was our origin, that starting point. And now we can measure from that up 4 inches. Just a single little tick up there. Very small. And then you're going to take your T-square up to that little mark, lightly drag in our pencil. And that one's a little bit darker, but that's okay. Okay, so now we have this line in place, we have that vertical line, and we have that horizontal line. Let's make that vertical line, that first vertical line that we did. Now that we know, first we did a guideline, right? We didn't really know how long it needed to be, then we measured. I'm gonna call a permanent line. So this should be the darkest thing on your page right now. I went over it twice. So pay attention, because in some pieces you won't be able to do that. Like this piece over here, there's a cutout between this permanent line and this permanent line. So you don't want to make that too dark. Same thing over here, you don't want to make those too dark. So just be careful that you know before you put your permanent line in. There's a few more vertical lines that are the outside border pieces. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But we can do all 12 of those lines pretty quickly. So pay attention here, I'm going to show you kind of a shortcut. All right, now it says here on the draft, pay attention there, it says that the distance between here and here is 1.5 inches. And the distance between here and here is 1/2 inch. So just to clarify what we're looking at there are 3 pieces on the 3-piece puzzle, right? 1, 2, 3. What we have here is the front of one piece. So I can turn the pieces like this and you'll see what the piece looks like from the side. So that's what I'm trying to illustrate with this draft. So we're looking at the front of piece number 1, and this rectangle right here is the side view of piece number 1. So let's put our ruler now on this permanent line that we just drew, and that's going to be our 0, and we're going to measure from here over 1.5 inches. So from 0 to here is 1.5 inches. Now without even moving your ruler, you can do the next bit. Just come over here to 2 and put a small line, and then at 2.5, put another small line. And notice I put all those lines across my guideline. You can bring your T-square up here and make them permanent. So you see, I don't have to measure. I know that these permanent lines are 4 inches, but I don't have to measure 4 inches again. I only have measured 4 inches one time, but here I'm being able to use that measurement. Actually, it'll be a total of 12 times. Now, where do we start piece number 2? Now, here's where I see a lot of students make a mistake. They want to start measuring on this border line. We want those border lines to stay clean. We don't want to touch those at all. So we're going to start about here. And if I measured that, it would be about 1/8 inch off the border line. And you can do the same thing here. Just come over here and put a mark about 1/8 inch away from the border line. Okay, so that's where we're going to start 0 on our ruler now. We're going to put our 0 up there, and it's the same thing, 1.5 inches, and then 1/2 inch. You can mark it at 2 and mark it at 2.5. So the distance between here and here is 1/2 inch. All right, now if anybody, I can't really see you right now, of course, but if this is going too fast, just pause the video, rewind it, don't freak out. Now I'm trying to keep in mind that on this piece, piece number 2, and on piece number 3, there's going to be a chunk taken out over here. So I may have made that a little bit too dark for right now. Okay, so come over here, 1.5 inches. I'll mark it at 2 and 2.5. Guys, you could also, it doesn't matter what lines you mark it at on the ruler, right? As long as they're exactly 1/2 inch apart. If what I just did here, if that shortcut was confusing, then just come over here and say, well, I'll mark it at 0 and 1/2 inch, okay? Because the distance between 0 and 1/2 inch is the same distance between 1 and 1.5, and 1.5 and 2, and 2 and 2.5. It's the same distance, right? But just do what makes sense for your brain there. Okay, now, remember this time, Broadway. Trying to leave this space open here, because even, look at that on that example, that's wrong. That line shouldn't be there. So we're going to make this example perfect. We're going to make this come to here, and I haven't measured this yet, so I'm just going to bring in this line kind of like that. We'll measure in a minute to be really precise where that dark line is going to go. But you can see over here, these 3 dark lines, or these permanent lines, they don't have any breaks in them. So you can go ahead and make those your normal permanent lines now if you're ready to do that. But what we do want to do probably at this point to make things look nice is kind of clean it up. So you can pull out your eraser and you can start erasing your guidelines. Of course, what you need to do is not only erase guidelines,
but darken guidelines where you want them to be permanent. So I want this to be permanent right here. Nice contrast there. So we can clearly see that we want that rectangle to be there, right? So go ahead and take a second to do that. But let's go ahead and label some stuff. Take a break from measuring. We can label piece number 1, piece number 2, piece number 3. And I'll show you a little trick. If you use your T-square, you can just put like a little guideline. This is a very light line, just somewhere in the middle. It doesn't matter where, but don't move your T-square, and you can make this little guideline up there, and then come down a little bit, however big you want your letters to be. I didn't measure this, I just came down a little bit, and make a similar guideline, just a little bit lower, and then you can come in here and write your labels. Now why do we do that? Just to keep everything straight. This is what's called orthographic projection, where you make a measurement once and then project it with the T-square across your page. You can do projection in a horizontal way, or you can do projection in a vertical way. But orthographic projection is really great for keeping things straight. In fact, the word ortho in Greek means straight. Just like you go to the orthodontist and he straightens your teeth, what we're doing is we're keeping our graph, our graphic, orthographic, our picture, we're keeping our picture straight. Okay? We have to take into account where these cutouts are going to go, where these holes are going to go. So let's look at maybe the design of this puzzle really quickly. This puzzle comes from a piece of stock, a piece of wood like this. It's 1/2 inch thick this direction, and it's 1.5 inches thick, or I should say wide, 1.5 inches wide this direction. So the thickness of the wood is here, the width of the wood is here. Now the length of the wood is, you know, the long part, right? In this case, I'm going to give you a piece of wood that's 12¼ inches long. We'll explain why 12¼ later. But if you look here, we've got 3 pieces that are 4 inches tall, right, or 4 inches long. Well, if you put that together, 4 plus 4 plus 4 equals 12. That extra 1/4 inch, I'll let you guess what it's for, but I'll tell you later. So we want them to fit together like this. So that means our cutout in piece number 1 needs to be 1/2 inch by 1.5 inches. Okay, and it needs to be in the middle. Same thing with piece number 2 and piece number 3. You know, in essence, it's got the same cutout. This basic rectangle you see in piece number 1 is also in piece number 2 and piece number 3. It's just that piece number 2 has this additional notch, and piece number 3 has that other weird, funky notch over there, okay? So let's do the basic 1.5 inch by 1/2 notch rectangle in all 3 pieces. Now we really only we can do the same thing. We can do orthographic projection, and we only need to measure 1.5 inches one time. But we need it to be centered. So according to this example draft, you'll see the reference point is the bottom line, and it says from the bottom line you need to come up 1¼ inches, and then from this line there's a reference of 1.5. So from this bottom line to this top line right there of the inside notch, 1.5 inches. Well, if you do the math, or if you were to even put a ruler up here, you'd see that the distance between the top of the notch and the top of the overall block is 1¼ just like it is on the bottom. So here's one way you could measure all that out. We're going to put the 0 at the bottom line. Our reference point is going to be this bottom line. So 0 at the bottom line of the piece number 1. And we'll measure from 0 up this direction 1¼ inches. And I just want you to put a mark like this. Now here's another tip about marking. You see the little lines on your ruler that actually indicate where the measurement is? They go, in this case, they're going like this, right? You want the mark on your paper to go the exact same way. Okay, so that it's basically you're taking this line and you're painting it onto the page. So just extend that line, if you will, onto the page. All right, and then we're going to flip the ruler up like this. 0's on the top. We're going to come down to 1¼ inch. Same measurement from the bottom and the top. So double check yourself. Make sure that the distance between this line and this line is 1.5 inches. If you messed up somewhere, take a break. Let's erase it and go back. Now, when you've got these 2 marks, these 2 reference points, we can use those and project them across the page. I just want to point out that you need to be labeling your measurements just to keep things consistent and keep things clear. So what I'm going to do is take a second here. I'm going to go back and do something I should have done earlier. I'm going to label these measurements. So that's 1.5 inches for this line, and all these are 1/2 inch. You also need to label the distance here at 4 inches. Now, sometimes, guys, it's not clear what that number is referring to. So what you need to do is pull your T-square up here and make a very small sort of indicator right here that I'm going to draw an arrow from the 4 up to here, and same thing down here. And so the distance between this line and this line is 4 inches, and it's clear to see that this line matches up with that line, right? So we're going to put a vertical line in here. We're going to project it across very lightly all the way here, because I don't need it to go past this piece right here, right? Now this whole thing is mostly going to get erased, so make sure it's very light. It's easier to do a projection line and then erase what you don't need later. Now I can't really make these lines permanent until I make measurements in this direction, in the horizontal direction. But because this guideline is now in, I have a reference point to measure on, okay? These two vertical lines are going to go right there. And now, here's the key measurement for this part, guys. It's 1/2 inch. So from the border to this line is 1/2 inch. From this line to this line is 1/2 inch. And from this line to the other border is all 1/2 inch. And that's true for all 3 pieces. If you bring your ruler up to 0 and just make sure that the other edge of the border of piece number 1 is at 1.5. If it is a little bit off, I don't know if you can tell in the video, mine is off by a very small amount, less than 1/16 of an inch. That's okay. Then I want you to just kind of split the difference so that you know you're in the middle. And here's all you got to do. Mark it right here at 1/2 inch, but don't move your ruler now. Mark it at 1 inch. So I'm all about efficiency of movement on the drafting board, okay? I don't want to have to like re-zero my ruler here, re-zero it here, or whatever. Just zero it one time and make 2 marks. Okay, we'll come over here. We'll do the same thing. 0 at 1 time, split the difference if it's slightly wide, and make your 2 marks at 1/2 inch and at 1 inch. Now, why 1 inch? Well, because 1 inch is exactly 1/2 inch away from 1/2 inch, and it's exactly 1/2 inch away from 1.5. Now you've got 6 lines that we could put on there from 2 measurements. Remember, we just measured horizontally, right? So now we're going to bring in our T-square vertically. Pay attention to where your permanent lines need to go, because they won't be able to go everywhere at this time. And then I know from the draft that my top and bottom lines of these inside notches are all permanent. Let's pay attention to the side pieces as well. Now this is something we could just do really quickly. You see these dotted lines here and here and here and here and here? We can just go ahead and put those dotted lines in as well. What the dotted line means, there's an important feature of the piece that's hidden. So you see this cutout, right? That's the main feature of this piece, right? If I turn it like this, I can't see that cutout, but you need to know it's there. So to indicate where it is on the draft, you'll put a dotted line where it is. That means there's something there, you just can't see it because there's something else in the way. Take your time, go ahead and erase some guidelines. Clean as you go. Now, there's 2 measurements you got to make here. 1 3/16 on piece number 2, and on piece number 3, it's 1 3/4. And then don't forget that 1/8 of an inch over there. If you don't know where 1 13/16 is, here's a quick shortcut. Come to 1. The middle line between 1 and 2 is 1/2 inch. That's 8/16. So we'll go start here. We'll say 8. We'll go 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So that's 1 13/16. Same as before, we're trying to center this thing up, so let's measure the same thing from the top, 1 13/16. And it also says on the example draft that the 2 lines need to be 3/8 of an inch apart. So if everything is correct, they should be 3/8 of an inch, and that is very, very close to that. I'm going to make my permanent lines just a little bit wider. You also have to remember, guys, that the width of your pencil comes into account here. That's why I say you need to have a very sharp pencil. While your T-square is here, come over to the side view and make this line as well. And this will be a dark, solid, permanent line right there. Come back up here and over here, it'll be a dark, solid, permanent line. Now, sometimes people project these measurements that we just made, they project it to piece number 3, but don't do that. The piece number 3 measurements are different, and that's important. Okay, so these are solid lines because if you look at the side of piece number 2, like so, you will actually see those 2 cuts right there, right? But you can't see this cut from the side view. You have to look at it from, you have to turn it to look at it. Okay, now I did mess up over here. I made this line permanent, so come back and erase that. On the draft, it tells you to measure 1 3/4 of an inch from the bottom up. It's also 1 3/4 of an inch from the top down. So same thing as before. From the bottom, 1 3/4 of an inch. And without turning my ruler around, I'm gonna bring 1 3/4 up to the top line of this piece. So I'm just measuring backwards like I do sometimes. 1 3/4 of an inch here, 0 is where I put my mark. Now you've got those 2 reference points, and we're gonna need to make a couple lines with those. We're gonna need to make this line with this kind of back notch here, and then project it over to the side view. Now that looks a little bit like you need to connect the dots, right? There's only one more measurement we need to make, and that's the 1/8 of an inch from here over. Use your T-square to connect all those little dots up, even though it's like, oh, that's just a little bitty, bit right there. Well, just, use the T-square because it's gonna connect things better. It's gonna make sure everything is crisp and perfectly straight. So at this point, I have all my lines on there correctly. What I don't have are my numbers labeled. And you need to do that. That's very important. What we've just created is a reference for step number 2, which is marking the wood. So this took a little bit of work, a little bit of time to put. You could hand this to somebody else and they could go and use your draft to manufacture the thing that you designed. The 1/8 of an inch little line there, you can freehand. I want you to make sure that you use your T-square to draw the lines that point to your measurement. So again, to draft in a measurement, you're gonna write the measurement where you want it to be, 1 3/4 of an inch, and then use your T-square to make light lines. These are not dark permanent lines, these are light lines, and little arrows that point to what 1 3/4 is a reference to, right? So between here and here is 1 3/4 of an inch. Make sure you put the little quote mark, which means inches, right? So I don't need you to tell me every time, there's an 1.5 inches between here and here. No, once is good enough. I only put the label for centering boxes this direction, like 1 1/4 is only written once, 1 3/16 is only written once, 1 3/4 is only written once. So I'm gonna stop the video here and let you guys go ahead and label the rest of that stuff on your own and move on to step number 2.